Hi, I remember being about 10 or 12 years old and being told I had a soul. And I worried about that a bit because, I wasn't sure I had one. I was well aware of my body and my thoughts and my feelings and so on, but where was this weird thing called my soul? And what was it doing? I couldn't feel anything beyond what was already explained by my kind of body and my thoughts and emotions and stuff. Maybe I didn't have one. Maybe I was abnormal. Maybe I was some weird freak. So, what about you? Do you have a soul? And what does soul mean to you? In the last two videos, I explored the ideas of the ancient Greek philosophers before Socrates about the soul, and then Plato's ideas. We were really exploring the origins of psychology, at least in the West. Today, we move on to Plato's student Aristotle, who lived in the 4th century BCE, who became arguably the father of psychology. He had some strange ideas about the soul and the psyche, but also ideas, I think, that have gone down and formed and stayed in psychology as it is today. So we're going to take a look at a few interesting clips in this particular video. Trigger warning, you're going to see some egregious 1970s, 1980s fashion. And we're going to be exploring the views of Aristotle through the scholar Martha Nussbaum and Brian Magee as we consider how Aristotle would have answered these questions. 1. Aristotle, do I have a soul or a psyche? I'm going to use those two words interchangeably for a reason. 2. What is the soul or psyche? 3. How much of me is merely matter, the material or a body, and how much of me is soul or psyche? 4. What does my psyche do, Aristotle? And 5. Will my psyche outlive my body? 6. How should I live my best life, psychologically speaking? And 7, most importantly, does my cat have a soul? By the way, I don't have a cat, but anyway, maybe you do. Does your cat have a soul? 8, finally, if you have other questions, please do add them into the comments below. And if you've got a really good soul, subscribe and put a like in there as well. Okay, question 1, Aristotle, do I have a soul or a psyche? Aristotle's answer will be yes and no, and it depends, of course, on what you mean by soul. His view would be, in a nutshell, not that you have a soul, but that you are one. Let's explain. Moving on to question 2, which brings us swiftly on to our next question. What exactly is the soul or psyche for Aristotle? I'm going to introduce now 2 concepts, which if you saw my previous videos, you'll already know about. And these are going to be important for answering a number of these other questions that follow. And these concepts are the ideas of form and matter. If that sounds a little bit dry, just stay with me, because just a little bit of understanding is going to help us understand this quite clearly. Now, you would have seen in the last video that Plato believed that the best way to explain the objects we see in the world is that they are material things informed, literally informed, notice the word form there, informed by forms or ideas. The forms for Plato were these kind of perfect heavenly spiritual ideas or blueprints or archetypes of what we see, albeit imperfectly embodied in earthly objects. So we might see cats or circles in the world, not perfect cats, not perfect circles, but there is a perfect universal form or archetype of catness or circularity that informs the particular instances of cats or circles that we encounter. Matter, for Plato, we saw, is a less real thing than form that exists in this other layer of reality. For Aristotle, there probably are no forms that exist without matter. Different view to his mentor Plato. Matter is very important to Aristotle, who doesn't see it as less important like Plato did. Aristotle can't imagine that there's this kind of immaterial world of forms, but he can only see objects that have form. So back to our question now. Do you have a soul? For Aristotle, the soul, his answer is going to give is, yeah, kind of, but you are a soul. That's basically it. For Aristotle, the soul is the form of the body. In other words, it's not this kind of ethereal substance that comes into your body at conception and leaves at your death, but is simply the form, the archetype, the blueprint, the structure, and the functions of your body. It's not the same as the body, but it's the blueprint, the informing principle of the body. Now, it's going to be important, we'll take a slight detour here for a second to realise that for Aristotle, there are 4 causes to explaining things, objects. And in modern times, we're only used to explaining things through 2 of these causes. So let's just run through Aristotle's 4 causes. First, excuse me, there's the material cause. That basically means anything that explains the composition of an object, okay, like human tissue, bronze, wood. And we're used to that in modern psychology. We're used to the material explanation of what we are as beings. The second cause for Aristotle is the efficient cause. And this efficient cause is that which answers the question, what mechanism brings about change? Cause and effect in a mechanical way. And we're used to that also in modern psychology. You know, this part of the brain causes this kind of emotional reaction. That's the kind of way that psychology thinks at the moment. The third cause for Aristotle is what's called the formal cause, which is linked to this idea of of forms, okay? And it asks the question, what shapes, what informs the structure of a thing? And we're less used to that idea in modern psychology. Although notice that if you base psychology on biology, you just think what you are as a human being is an outgrowth of what you are as a biological entity, then you've got to realize that your psychological traits are informed by your biology, which is informed by your genetics. And your genetics, your genome, isn't just simply the DNA, it's the code, the information that's on there. They're not two the same thing. Something there to ponder. There's this idea of information. So maybe we haven't completely moved away from the idea of forms as much as we think, the formal cause. Anyway, there's a 4th type of causation for Aristotle, which is the final cause, which we don't have so much. This seeks to answer the question, what is this object for? What's its purpose? Aristotle believed most things exist for a purpose, a telos, a goal towards which they lean. And this idea held sway through science all the way through till Darwin, after which science then tended to think of biological objects, if you like, merely in terms of material and efficient causes. And psychology, likewise, has generally followed that trend in seeing your psyche as merely like kind of the foam atop a surging biological system that is ultimately just based on survival and chance, not a telos, not an aim, not an end. In short, yes, you have a psyche for Aristotle, but it's really just the form, the structure, the informatics, the capacities, the powers of your living body to be and do what it's meant to do. And it's interesting because unlike Plato, Aristotle's a kind of early scientist. He's an early empiricist, meaning that he sought to base knowledge on observation. Unlike Plato, he saw the senses, which is what empiricists do. They base their basic idea of where you get knowledge from. You can rely on the senses. He sees the senses as reliable for gaining knowledge. Plato didn't. And he thought that the only way really to understand the soul or the psyche is to infer it from what you could see it doing, from observation of its capacities. Let's move on to the third question. The third question is, how much of me is merely matter, material, body, and how much of me is soul or psyche? So we've already seen that Aristotle sees you as basically informed matter. You're a body that has particular capacities according to the species you are, which I hope is human. But there's a glitch in the materialist matrix here because, Aristotle's not a materialist. He believes more exists than matter, e.g. God or abstract geometric shapes. And two, he thinks there's an immaterial part of you. Unlike Plato, he doesn't fully think this immaterial part is a thing with separate existence, although I'm going to qualify that in a second. Your soul for Aristotle is not your body, but neither is it a ghost in the machine. Rather, it's kind of just the living, animating capacities and principles that run your body, much as we might say code in a computer program might run your laptop. You can't pluck out some code in your hand and go, look, here's some code from your laptop. And the code, the information's not identical as the numbers and script that you might see running across when you press run on a computer program. It's not the same as that. That's the representation of it. It's the information itself. However, I'm just going to qualify this idea that Plato doesn't see the potential for a fully immaterial separate part. I'm quoting here from A Brief History of the Soul by Stuart Goetz and Charles Taliaferro, published by Wiley-Blackwell. Page 27, they write this. While Aristotle is not a soul-body dualist, a dualist is someone that believes there's two sort of fundamental realities to a human. He's not a soul-body dualist in the sense that he maintains that the soul is a substance in its own right, which is separable from the body. He believes that the distinctive nature of thought or intellect provides him with grounds for making some suggestive remarks about the possibility of separating the intellect from its material housing. And we're going to quote Aristotle now from his book De Anima. This is from Lawson Tancred translation. Aristotle writes this, but nothing is yet clear on the subject of the intellect and the contemplative faculty. However, it seems to be another kind of soul, and this alone admits of being separated as that which is eternal from that which is perishable. While it is clear from these remarks that the other parts of the soul, nutritive, sensitive, are not separable, as some assert them to be, though it is obvious that they are conceptually distinct. So, scholars debate this, but I would say there is some sense there in which Aristotle does see the intellectual part of the human being as different from simply the material bits that it kind of joins up with and that it informs. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to explore this a little bit further, this idea of, is there this immaterial aspect, through a clip of philosophers Martha Nussbaum and Brian Magee discussing it. And I warned you earlier about fashion choices. This is like from the 1980s or something, but I think it's a great little discussion. So let's listen to them. I'm going to stop it and comment on it as I go.
what he wants to now ask is, all right, we've now gotten to the point where we see that notions that we call natural kinds, notions like human being, dog, or statue, say, play a fundamental role in identifying subjects in the world. Now we have to ask more precisely what they are. Are they, is it to be a human being? Is it to be a certain sort of material, or is it to be a certain structure? And in the metaphysics, he argues that what a substance is fundamentally not some material stuffs or constituents, but it fundamentally is a certain sort of order or structure, which he calls a form. Now, by that, he doesn't mean simply shape or configuration, but he means, in the case of, say, Brian Magee, the way you're organized to function. Your form is an organized set of functional capabilities that you've got to have so long as you're in existence. Now, he gives us 3 reasons for thinking that your materials couldn't be what it is to be you. Now, first of all, in the case of you and other living things, matter is always going in and out. It's always changing. And of course, you do change your material constituents very, very often without ceasing to be yourself. But second, even if that's not the case, say with an artifact, our conception of an artifact is that so long as its functional structure remains the same, we could always replace bits of the matter without having a different thing on our hands. We could take a ship and replace some of its planks. So long as it remained that functional structure, serving the function of a ship, we would still have the same entity on our hands. Finally, he argues that matter is just not definite enough to be what a thing really is. Matter is just a lump or heap of stuff. And so we couldn't say you are some stuff or other, but it's only when we've identified the structure that the stuff constitutes that we can even go on to say something intelligent about the stuff itself.
Let me just go over those again.
I'm just going to pause there. We'll bring him in a second. So really there, you've got this idea to say, look, what are you? Because like, Brian Magee there, or you watching this, or me here, over the years of my life, almost every single cell of my body, or every single part of me, if I'm a complete materialist or whatever, is going to be replaced. Okay. But do I still exist? Well, there seems to be something of continuity of what I am, even though none of the original bits of me remain. In philosophy, in ancient Greek philosophy, this is what she's talking about and referring to. There's this story of Theseus's ship. So the philosophers ask the question, well, what happens if, we've got Theseus's ship made up of all these planks of wood, and, when a plank begins to rot, we replace one of those planks. Is it still Theseus's ship? Yeah, people say, yeah, it's fine, it's just had a repair. Okay, what about if we replace 100 planks now, but 80% of it's still the original ship? Yeah, it's still the ship. Okay, what about if we go over 50% of the ship, so that like 53% of the ship is now not the original wood, it's new? Yeah, I think so. Okay, what about if we replace 100% of the planks of the ship one by one, gradually in continuity over time? Is it still Theseus's ship? Yeah. Okay, well then you ask the question, well, what's the difference between having that ship and then just building a replica next to it? Why is that not also Theseus's ship? Both of them have the same form, so talking about that word form, but there's different matter. Okay, so what is it that makes the ship the ship? What is it that makes you you? And she's arguing here that it's not really the material planks itself, it's the idea, the form of what you are that has continuity. Well, that, you've got the question there. It's like, okay, well, what then if you've got a replica ship? What if you've got a twin? We might say, is that you? Well, no, you'd say, no, that's not me. But I suppose you could argue your twin and you don't have the same continuity. So it's not exactly the same being, even though you're very similar. So those questions come up. Let's play a bit more and see what else I have to say.
Because I think they're arguments of a very fundamental kind. He says, first of all, Socrates, I think the actual example he takes is Socrates, isn't it? Socrates cannot consist of the matter that goes to make up his body, because this matter is constantly changing, and in fact changes completely several times in the course of Socrates' life, but he's still the same Socrates throughout that life. So he can't just be the matter of which he consists. But secondly, this applies to species as a whole. A dog can't just be a dog in virtue of the matter of which it consists, because different dogs are different. I mean, some are brown, some are black, some are white. They're different colors, different shapes, different sizes, different weights, but they're all dogs. So they can't be dogs in virtue of the matter of which they consist. And thirdly, just a heap of matter without any abstract qualities such as organization or structure or form isn't a dog or a person or a shoe or a house or anything. It is just a heap, and that anything can only be anything at all by virtue of its structure, its form, its function. Is that right?
Yeah, your second one adds a further argument, actually, that I didn't mention. Yes, the different species members are all, of course, differently constituted materially. That would be one further reason for rejecting the idea that matter gives us a perfectly general account of what it is to be a member of that species. But then I want to add the further point that even when the matter, in fact, doesn't vary, still our conception of what it is to be a certain sort of thing, say a ship, doesn't identify it with the matter, and we can see that by performing a thought experiment that says if you replace the material bits just so long as you have continuity of functional structure, then you still have the same thing on your hands.
But now, isn't this bringing Aristotle dangerously close to Plato's theory of forms, which he's rejected? Because isn't he now saying a dog isn't a dog by virtue of the matter of which it consists? It's a dog by virtue of its dogness, its abstract dogness. Isn't he in that position, or dangerously close to it?
Well, of course, here we get to a very difficult area about what exactly form is, and I think no two philosophers are going to be in precise agreement about the interpretation on this. But let me try to say what I think. Now, I think, first of all, it's quite clear that, unlike Plato, he makes the form something immanent to the particular. It does not exist apart from that particular perceptible dog in some heavenly realm of dogness, but it's just there. It's what the dog in fact is. It's not separate from
In other words,
the
it's
dog.
not an otherworldly spirit.
Right. It's right there. It's what the dog really is. It is that dog. Now, the second thing, I believe that the Aristotelian forms are individuals. That is, they're particulars and not universals. That is to say, even though the definition of the doggy form of each dog, if I take 5 dogs, I'm going to get only one definition of what it is to be a dog for all of them. Still, if I ask how many examples of doggy form do I have here, well, the answer is the number is 5. I mean, just as many dogs as there are. Each one, although quite like in quality, will be exactly 1 in number, as he puts it. That'd be, we count forms by counting the number of substances that we have on our hands.
I must say, it seems to me, even sort of getting on for 3,000 years later, that these arguments against materialism are devastating. Do you think that Aristotle has effectively ever been answered by materialist philosophers?
No, I don't think he has. And I think what I find so powerful about these arguments is that he starts arguing against materialism, not only within the context of philosophy of mind, and not only by picking out some special characteristics of the mental which make it different from everything else, but precisely here by developing these general theories of identity and substance, which show why, for things quite generally, including artifacts, material reductionism is not a good way to go.
Okay, so a lot to unpack there. But so you've got this different idea of forms between Plato and Aristotle. So both of them seem to think there's something immaterial in a way that gives things their shape. The difference is, for Plato, that kind of information exists in a kind of ethereal plane, whereas for Aristotle it exists, you know, let's put it this way. For Plato, there might be an idea of catness that informs, that goes into each cat and shapes cats in that way. But for Plato, it doesn't exist in that way. It's the form, or the idea is in each cat and nowhere else. Okay, it's in the world. It's immanent is the word that she used. But they also touched on another idea. So from both Plato and Aristotle, you've got this idea of forms not being reducible to matter. So there's a kind of argument against materialism from both Plato and Aristotle's way of looking at this. And you can think of it like this. They talk about this idea of a heap. If you think of matter, can you imagine any matter without form? Whatever matter it is, whatever kind of matter it is, look at the atoms, it's always got structure. But there's a kind of an informatics to the matter, whether you see that as coming from outside or it's kind of immanent, intrinsic within the matter. You haven't just got shapeless stuff. There's always form. And here's a kind of sense in which, well, that form is not made of matter itself. You can't reduce form to matter. Form is kind of in the matter or from the outside coming into the matter somehow or other. And both Aristotle and Plato see matter as kind of sort of empty, sort of shapeless, and it needs informing. So neither Plato nor Aristotle are materialists and believe in this kind of immanent, this kind of non-material something that shapes the world that we see. But for Aristotle, it only occurs in and with and at the same time as matter. For Plato, it comes into matter, if you like, and exists separately to it. So interesting, just thought I would share that clip. So question 4, let's move on. Question 4 is, what does the psyche do for Aristotle? All sorts for Aristotle. Like Plato, Aristotle thinks you have a 3-part psyche. So he talks about the vegetative soul, which is involved in, like with plants and in animals, it's involved in nutrition and growth. He believes in the sensitive soul, which basically gives the capacity for movement and perception and sensing. Animals have that, plants don't. Although Aristotle didn't know about, what's that called, heliotropism, I think, where plants move actually towards the sun and things like that. He wasn't aware of that because it happened so slowly. So he might have revised his theory looking back. But anyway, so yeah, you've got vegetative soul, which is all about just a very basic kind of function of nutrition and growth. And on top of that, for animals, you also have sensitive soul. And he sees that in animals as kind of, they're not two separate souls. They're kind of, in animals, you've got more capacities within soul. So you've got the vegetative element plus the sensitive element. And then, of course, for humans, we've got all three. We've got the vegetative, which is simply about nutrition and growth. We've also got the sensitive, which is about movement and senses. But we've also got the rational soul. This is, again, not 3 souls. This is 1 soul with 3 levels of capacity. And the rational soul is what gives you the ability to do intellectual stuff, thinking, reasoning, deliberating, and so on. Okay, so there you go. That's what he thinks your soul does. It runs your body program, allows you also to think and do intellect and stuff like that. Question 5. Will my psyche outlive my body? This is interesting. I think the answer is basically kind of no, but I'm going to qualify it a bit. He thinks the soul and psyche, as we said already, can't exist apart from the body. So if your body dies, that's your psyche gone. Interestingly, he has also posited the idea of the rational soul. And we that quote earlier from these guys, he sees that as perhaps the only separable part that's linked to the eternal. So I would imagine that Aristotle, in some senses, thinks that carries on. But the question then becomes, because we just said, haven't we, you've got your soul is tripartite, 3 parts. You've got the vegetative functions, you've got the sensitive functions, and then you've got the rational functions. Does he think that sort of part of you goes on? but he certainly doesn't think these parts go on. When you die, your capacity to grow and to feed disappears. Your capacity to sense and to feel disappears. But maybe he thinks the rational soul, in some sense, continues. But the question then becomes: is that actually you? Is that really you? Because is it recognizably you anymore? I'm not sure, and I'm not sure Aristotle is thoroughly clear on these questions about the rational soul. There's some tentativity around this area for him. Okay, question 6. How should I live my best life, psychologically speaking, according to Aristotle? Eudaimonia is the answer to that. Eudaimonia was Aristotle's word for flourishing. And this means living to your fullest capacities. Notice that word capacities again, as the entity you are designed to be. Remember our reference earlier to final causes. You're here for a purpose. All things, or most things, exist to an end, okay, for Aristotle. So your task is to live a well-balanced and harmonious life, and this entails being virtuous, similar to Aristotle, and being led by reason, similar to Plato. But Aristotle isn't simply hung up on this as an idea of kind of morals and morality and rules. He teaches that the virtuous life is a life lived wisely, pursuing the right balance between excess and deficiency. E.g., being wise might mean being courageous but not reckless, courageous but not cowardly. A kind of the doctrine of the middle, this is called, this kind of right balance of virtue. That's what virtue is. So his approach is more practical than Plato's, in that he thinks you have to be pragmatic and deal with circumstances differently and wisely depending on the situation. And he puts way more stock on the importance of flourishing physically, no surprise, than Plato, as he sees the body and matter as vital and as not kind of some encumbering prison like Plato did. And we might say his advice would be to live well in all domains of life, to fully flourish in all your capacities, including bodily concerns and social life and your role in society. Question 7. Most importantly, does your cat have a soul? For Aristotle, the answer, I think, is no. No more than you, no body, no soul. No cat, no body, even if it has 9 lives. Sorry about that. And of course, unless you want to argue that your cat has a rational soul rather than just a vegetative and sensitive aspect of soul, then there's nothing to continue into the eternal. I don't know if Aristotle's right, and it seems a bit mean. Anyway, if you have other questions or comments, I'd love to hear from you. Please put something in the comment section below. If it's an opinion or a question, whatever, you want a bit of dialogue between other people as well. I generally get involved, so please put something in there. And put a like in there, and do subscribe if you've not done so already, and check out the other videos like the one on Plato that I did earlier and the one before that on the pre-Socratics. And yeah, like, subscribe, all that stuff, because it helps us on the old algorithm. Please share it widely, be generous and kind and a good soul. Thank you for listening. Take care. See you soon.